GrownKid is made possible by the Schultz Family Foundation, dedicated to helping young people unlock their full potential and successfully navigate to fulfilling careers. GrownKid is made in partnership with Joy Coalition, where purpose-driven content means powerful storytelling. From 13 Reasons Why to Unprisoned, Joy Coalition projects are made to bridge generations and drive groundbreaking conversations.
Dr. Robert, we wanted to talk to you because it seems to me, especially with things like cancel culture, people aren't willing to give each other grace. And I think that's the attitude that a lot of Gen Z feel, is that you're not allowed to make a mistake. If you say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing. And if you were uneducated on a topic and mess up publicly, you get called out for it, which, rightfully so. But then also, there's no room for forgiveness most of the time, which is a really strange thing. And so I'm really curious to just learn, when is it appropriate to give someone the gift of forgiveness, and when is it better to just protect your peace, move on, and maybe not forgive, cut off the relationship, cut off the friend, distance yourself from them. And I know forgiveness can be a very personal topic, and that varies a lot from person to person, but how do you define forgiveness?
What forgiveness is, it's what we call a moral virtue, which is to be good to others, but particularly it's to be good to those who are not good to you. And so the struggle is to try and offer this goodness in the form of kindness, respect, generosity, or even love, which is really high and isn't necessarily achieved, without excusing what the other did, without forgetting what the other did. You may or may not reconcile when you forgive. You can be good to someone at a distance, and you don't throw justice under the bus. Forgiveness and justice grow up together. And so you're not being this weakling who lies down and says, "Walk on my face, I forgive you." You can stand in forgiveness and be good to someone and still say, with justice in your mind and heart, what you're doing isn't right. Let's change that.
That is so fascinating. And I think what I struggle with is I tend to be the type of person that gives people too many chances. And to me, I think it's is that just me forgiving or is that me forgetting? What is it, And so what does it mean to have justice? And I know it can vary from person to person. So is it more of an objective thing or subjective?
Well, it is objective. Sure. In fact, we even have in universities entire schools dedicated to the study of justice. We call them law schools. And the laws of the land are not arbitrary. It's not subjective in what you think you should do at a red light versus what I think I should do at a red light. If you want to go and I don't, you're going to get a ticket. So there are forms of justice that clearly are objective and universal. And so there are right and wrong issues in the world, and people bullying you or people continually putting you down without asking, what do you really mean by this, and trying to get to know, that's not fair, right? And so when you see those who are breaking the standards of civility on the internet or face-to-face, what they're doing is wrong, objectively wrong, and you now can do two things. You can relieve the burden in your heart by forgiving and watch your back and ask something of the person, but you're going to ask it differently if your heart is softer with forgiveness than if you're fuming with rage. Because this idea of asking for the pound of flesh, so to speak, when you're really, really angry is very different than trying to work it out when you see the humanity in the other, even though the person is behaving badly. The quality of how you go about seeking justice, I have found, is qualitatively different and better when you have forgiveness in your heart first.
And the idea, too, of forgiveness, being good to somebody, even if they aren't being good to you, in those cases, does a person have to feel morally obligated to forgive them? Because I think a lot of the times there's this pressure on the side of the person that is forgiving the other person that they have to do this in order for them to feel morally correct.
Well, actually, there was a recent article in the New York Times newspaper called "Sometimes Forgiveness is Overrated." And the whole point of that article was people feel pressured these days because of the self-help books and the norms to forgive. And so forgiveness is overrated because it can do harm when you're pushed into it. But that's actually not correct philosophy, because it's not forgiveness's fault when people push you into it. It's not forgiveness's fault when you push yourself into it. You can be good whenever you want to without feeling that kind of pressure, and you should resist it. Here's a big reason why you should forgive only when you're ready. Philosophers say forgiveness is supererogatory. And what that means is it's your choice when you're ready. There's no have tos. There's no rule book anywhere in the world saying you have to forgive. So you can forgive when you're ready, resist your own pressure, resist pressure from others. And that was one of the big raps in the New York Times newspaper article, that because people are pressured, forgiveness is a problem. No, the problem is with those who put the pressure on you. What I like about that there are no rules, there's no codification in law about forgiveness. You are free to be good to another or to others whenever you wish. There's a freedom in forgiveness, and you should resist the pressure if you're not ready.
So, Dr. Robert, what does it feel like to be ready to forgive?
Okay, you know what I find is the biggest motivator to forgive? Inner pain. Because when we've been treated very unjustly by others, there's a tendency to get angry, and that's good. Early anger is good because it shows you're a person who deserves respect, you're a person of worth, and you should not be treated that way. But once this anger settles into the human heart, it can grow and turn into resentment. It can turn into hatred. It can also lead to anxiety and depression. And so the original injustice against you isn't the major wound. It's the effect of that on the heart. And when people finally realize that, I've been restless, I have been somewhat tormented by this person. 2 years ago, you're no longer with that person, but that person is living in your heart. Now the question is, how can you quiet the heart so this person and the toxicity that that person brought into your heart is removed, so that you are now free of the resentment that literally could stay with you for the rest of your life, depending on the seriousness of the injustice against you. Forgiveness sets you free of the resentment that you could take to your grave. But it is that being good, deliberately choosing, if you're ready to do so, that chips away at that resentment and slowly takes it out of the heart, so that the goodness replaces the resentment or hatred, and you are now set free by deliberately choosing through your own free will. The goodness melts away the resentment.
That is so powerful that an apology or simply just forgiving somebody can really do that. And I would love to know too, what is the psychology behind forgiveness and it releasing that anger and resentment that a person can hold?
The basic psychology is a paradox. A paradox is not a contradiction. It's what appears to be a contradiction, but it is not. And here's the deal on that. Let's say, again, as an example, you've left your job 2 years ago because of a boss who kept beating on you verbally. Once you have that in your heart and you decide to be good to the boss, which might mean donating some money to a charity in the boss's name, or a favorable comment about the boss, you are literally being good to the boss without reconciling, without coming together in mutual trust. But it is that being good, deliberately choosing, if you're ready to do so, that chips away at that resentment and slowly takes it out of the heart, so that the goodness replaces the resentment or hatred, and you are now set free by deliberately choosing through your own free will to think, feel, and behave in good ways toward the boss, rather than closing your fist tightly around your heart and squeezing it and hoping you're squeezing the boss, who quite literally now could care less about that. And that's the deal with forgiveness. It's the paradox. The goodness melts away the resentment.
So fascinating. And in the model of forgiveness, there's four stages that you've described: the uncovering phase, the decision phase, work phase, and the outcome phase. So can you tell us more about each of these stages and what they actually are?
Yeah, these, I call them phases. And first of all, we discovered these by talking to many, many, many people about their forgiveness journey when they say they have forgiven. And we found that there's characteristically four different aspects to forgiveness that are very common to most people. Now, they're not going to follow these step by step. You're going to go back to some of these, or some are irrelevant. But first, the uncovering phase is knowing you've been treated unjustly and owning that. You're not ending up denying the injustice. And so what you're going to see in this uncovering phase is how the effects of that injustice are tumbling down on you, which is emotional pain, being tired, for example. You consider yourself to be less of a person, we have found. When you're beaten down by others, people believe the lie. And so there's a tendency here to even change your philosophy of life to become much more pessimistic. And when people see all that's going on within them, they're uncovering the effects of the injustice that, in the case of the example we're using, happened 2 years ago. But all these effects are very present to you, which then leads to the decision phase. You want to do something about the effects? What we have found psychologically is without forgiveness, with traditional psychotherapeutic means, these effects do not melt away very easily. Aaron Beck, who was the founder of cognitive behaviorism, a giant in the field, actually said in the back of one of my books with Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons that his approach, the cognitive behaviorism, isn't strong enough to get rid of these effects, that we actually need something more powerful, which is forgiveness, and that's the decision phase. We say, well, if you really want to get rid of these effects in your heart, you want to try forgiveness? At that point, most people are hesitant because they think of forgiveness as just giving in, saying the person is okay with what the person's doing. They misunderstand. So a big part of the decision phase is to define forgiveness. You will, when you're ready, try to be good to the other, even at a distance. That person who wasn't good to you, you won't be excusing what the person did. That was unfair, is unfair, always will be unfair. You won't forget lest it happen again. Reconciliation may or may not be on the table because reconciliation is coming together in mutual trust. If you can't trust that boss, you're not getting together, and you won't abandon justice. Do you want to try it? At this point, many people will say, well, I've tried everything else under the sun to heal. It hasn't worked. I'll give it a shot. Then we go to the third of four phases, what we call the work phase. We roll up our sleeves. We hit the forgiveness gym to become forgivingly fit, okay? And it takes effort, as we've discussed in this program already. And what we do is we have, first of all, thinking exercises toward the one who hurt us. We first take a personal perspective. We widen the lens of who this person is beyond the behaviors that hurt you. See, we tend to stereotype people who hurt us. We define them by their ill behavior. We widen the lens and we look at that person's woundedness. We look at what that person has carried into the interaction with us. The boss who keeps beating on us, in all likelihood, was beaten down somewhere at some time, maybe in childhood. And the person is carrying that into the employment agency, you see. And so we see the woundedness in the other. Then we take a global perspective where we see that you actually share something really, really important with the one who hurt you. You share a common humanity. You're both going to die one day. You both need good nutrition. You both should be treated fairly. And you both have, because you're special, unique, and irreplaceable, both of you, you have built-in worth. You have inherent worth. When you put them all together, you see a wounded person who shares worth with you, who one day you might see the person in heaven, depending on your religious beliefs, and you begin to see someone who's much more than someone who's hurt you. That, you know what that leads to? Compassion for that person, a softening of the heart, which is, again, the chipping away of the resentment. Then we ask the person in the work phase to bear the pain or stand in the pain so you don't throw the pain back to that person. You had said at the beginning of the program, when we look at some of the social media, it's the give and take of strife and of harsh words, and it's back and forth and back and forth. Stand in the pain so you don't pass it back to the other. You know what you're doing then? You're giving a gift to the other. You're being good to the other. That's part of the moral virtue, you see, of forgiveness. And then near the end of the work phase, once you've hit this forgiveness gym long enough and you're becoming forgivingly fit, we ask the person, can you give a gift of some kind to the one who hurt you? But only when the person's ready, which is, again, that kind word, or even if you can interact with the person, a kind word to the person rather than just about the person. And maybe talking through this idea toward the possibility of reconciliation, only if you're ready and the other's trustable. And then comes the discovery phase, where you discover that you are more sensitive to other people's pain, which gives you more meaning in your life to maybe help others with their pain, which gives you new purpose in your life. I talked with a gentleman who was in a correctional facility in for life. He said, I'm never getting out of here, but I have a new purpose, which is to help my cellmates get rid of the pain in their heart that they have suffered prior to their crimes. The discovery phase gives you new meaning and purpose in life and more sensitivity in general to the suffering of others in the world. And at the end, you know what you get here? Freedom from the emotional prison. You, by giving goodness to the other, are set free of those effects that we talked about in the uncovering phase, and it's you who are set free, whether the person accepts your forgiveness or not.
That's really interesting. And throughout all of this, we're speaking in the context of somebody doing something to hurt us, right? We're the ones that are dealing with the hurt and having to deal with forgiveness. But what if you're on the other side of that? What if I were the one to do something to hurt somebody and I feel guilty about it and I apologize? But it's more so about doing something wrong to someone. Sometimes it's just our inner perception of ourselves. And when we talk about self-forgiveness, whether we're disappointed with something we did, a way that we behaved, how does the process differ, if at all, when we're talking about self-forgiveness, which can deal with things like guilt and shame? And how can someone work through these feelings to reach that inner self-forgiveness?
Okay, if forgiveness is being good to those who've hurt you and you've hurt yourself, then the point is to be good to yourself even though you weren't good to yourself, okay? I find self-forgiveness for people to be harder than forgiving others. You know why? We tend to be harder on ourselves than we are on others. Because we can narrow our perspective of ourselves when we've done wrong, and we define ourselves perpetually by what we've done. And we live with our regrets and we define ourselves. Our identity becomes our errors. Self-forgiveness widens the lens. You see you're more than this. Without excusing what you did, you see you have inherent worth, even though you've behaved badly. If you've hurt others in the actions you've done that hurt yourself, go to them and apologize. Go and try to make amends to those whom you have hurt, as well as forgive yourself.
And what if you find that somebody doesn't want to accept your apology? What do you do then?
Let's say, again, you're forgiving yourself and you go to the other and you, instead of forgive, you are seeking forgiveness. And the other says, I'm not ready, get out of here, I don't want to see you anymore. You can go in peace because you've done the best you can. So you don't have to have it all tied up in a nice, neat package where you seek forgiveness, the other accepts it, and you hug and all is well. And it's the same thing when you forgive. If you forgive another and the other says, I'm not accepting it, you can go in peace there because you have done the best you can. So when you look at the effort you have exerted, your peace should not be dependent on the other's reaction to you. You have done your best. Go in peace. Don't wait for the other because then you know what you're doing? You're giving that person too much power over your inner world. Don't do it. Don't let that person have that kind of power. You've done your best. Go in peace.
And I think like these are one of the life skills, the social skills, emotional intelligence that we don't learn about. You know, no one in school tells you how to do this. There's no like forgiveness. It's just the golden rule, you know, like be kind.
I know, Gabrielle, you just hit my bucket list for forgiveness. Because what I would actually like to see is children at a young age be introduced through stories about forgiveness, because what is the point of education? Isn't it to prepare us for adulthood? Okay, we're prepared to read on Kindle. We're prepared to balance a checkbook. All that's great. But why are we not prepared to, in adulthood, confront the grave injustices against us that invariably will happen to everybody? Education needs to step up and see this. And we actually have curriculum guides from pre-kindergarten, age 4, through age 18, which is senior year in high school, which have been scientifically assessed. And these students, learning through stories without the pressure to forgive, but to learn about story characters forgiving, can actually increase their own forgiving of those who might have pushed them down on the playground and reduce anger. And we have what we call a meta-analysis that has been published by 3 authors, including myself as one of them, in the journal Child Development, showing across the world, in many world communities, that institute forgiveness education, anger is reduced, forgiveness is increased as the children learn to forgive, which I hope they will keep with them as a life skill. If that's what education is, to prepare us for adulthood, we need to include this universally in education.
Yes, I agree with that. And we'll actually leave everything you said in the show notes, and people that are listening can access it. So if they want to learn more about it, they can, because I fully believe in everything that you said. I think it would have been so helpful if I knew how to apply these rules in different situations, because it's like, yeah, well, what happens if you forgive someone who isn't sorry for what they've done? Then what? Like, what if you're not ready? What if they don't accept your apology? It's all of these little tiny scenarios that make us rethink, then what happens? But it kind of seems like the rules hold true regardless. If you do the best that you can, and ultimately you're the one in control of your inner world, and people will do the best that they can. And it's not so much of I am looking for your validation. It's just, it's the best that I can do with myself. But also, is it possible to reach inner peace without forgiving someone?
Well, we have found, because we do experimental and control groups, that when people have therapy as usual, they don't improve so much. Let me give you just 2 examples. Suzanne Friedman and I, a long time ago, published in 1996, did a study with incest survivors, one of the worst injustices known to humankind, because a girl who's supposed to be protected is violated by a father figure. We worked with 12 incest survivors, 6 doing forgiveness, 6 waiting, and having therapy as usual. All came to us psychologically depressed. That's understandable. At the end of a year of forgiveness therapy, going through the process model with Suzanne Friedman, the 6 who had forgiveness went to normal levels of depression. Well, what about the other group? They were trying to heal on their own. They were still clinically depressed for the most part. They then went through the forgiveness program for a year. You know what happened? They became non-depressed. And the first group maintained non-depression for the year that they weren't with forgiveness therapy. That's one example. In 2021, a group of us published a study of men in a maximum security correctional institution. We first assessed 107 men. 90% of them had grave injustices against them in childhood or adolescence. So deep they would make you weep. One guy was thrown out of his home when he was 11, and his bed was under cars for protection, and his dining room table was garbage cans. He became so enraged he hurt other people. We did an experimental versus control study as well, where the control group went through the hand-picked program from the Department of Corrections, and the experimental group had forgiveness for 6 months. All of them came to us clinically angry, anxious, and depressed. At the end of the 6 months, only those who had forgiveness went to normal levels of anger, anxiety, and depression. The others were still clinically at a level that needed help. They went through the forgiveness program. They too went to normal levels of anger, anxiety, and depression. And it remains to this day the strongest emotional health outcomes ever published in a men's maximum security correctional institution. But again, just as you say, Gael, with regard to education, why, oh why, oh why, do not the Department of Corrections include examining the grave hurts in the hearts of those who are murdering people because they're so enraged, and get rid of that hatred first, then give them traditional rehab in prisons? See, forgiveness is off the radar in places where it ought to be squarely on the radar.
I think so many people just don't want to forgive. Like that's the common sentiment on the internet and just throughout the world is people just don't want to do it. And I mean, my theory is that there's the idea of like moral justice, and people want justice and they want change to happen. And it feels like forgiveness is excusing that. It's like forgiveness is the easy way out. It's not holding someone accountable. So how do you navigate forgiveness, or how do you navigate the tension between forgiveness and the need for justice?
The key is to, first of all, let people see that the quest for justice alone doesn't work very well. I think this maximum security correctional study shows that. And see, people need forgiveness education to know what it really is. So they realize it isn't just excusing, it isn't just being weak, it's not being weak at all, and it's not throwing justice under the bus. That when you forgive, you do deliberately seek justice. And see, that's why we need to let people know that, because most people use the word forgiveness, but most people misunderstand it. And if they could only understand what it is, then make the free will decision on their own, I think they'd be better off. But you know what they're actually dismissing? They're not dismissing forgiveness. They're dismissing their own definition of forgiveness that's not correct. And so they're really not kicking forgiveness out. Let's give them a chance to see what forgiveness really is. Maybe they wouldn't kick it out so quickly.
I think something that I struggle with at times is this idea of if I forgive somebody one more time, I'm disrespecting myself because I'm letting them walk all over me. And I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of not knowing when to stop forgiving this person. And when do you cut them off?
Okay. See, there's the difference between forgiving and reconciling. If you keep giving the person the second chance, the third chance, the fourth chance, behaviorally with you, that's reconciliation. That's not forgiveness. You might forgive from the heart, but remember, forgiveness does not give the other an automatic ticket to be in relationship with you again if the person is abusive. So if you make that distinction and keep that distinction in your mind and heart and your behavior, you can forgive and say, no, 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 to this kind of relationship anymore, whether it's a romantic relationship or a work relationship or a friendship. And you can forgive while you say goodbye. And you might never see that person again if you're in two different states or the person goes to another country. And then you can work on the toxicity that is developed in your own heart without reconciling. But if we equate forgiveness with always giving in, sure, we might then say, I'm disrespecting myself. But that means be careful not to reconcile with people who are taking advantage of you. Forgive, yes, if you're ready, but then don't reconcile.
Yeah, that makes sense, because this whole episode, like I think that's part of it. That's part of the issue we're talking about is people don't know when to confront someone who is causing this stress. They're avoiding confrontation to protect their inner peace. And I think a lot of us is maybe just because we're not ready to forgive, we're still holding on to anger. And I think that is leading to loneliness. But then also, like, it's okay. It's good to hear that you can forgive without having to continue that relationship. And I feel like that's something I've really learned throughout this interview about forgiveness is you can forgive and still keep your distance. which I think I didn't realize you could do before.
Indeed, it's never too late to go into the forgiveness gym and become forgivingly fit.